Hello and welcome to my world, dear chess world. In this demonstration, I will be highlighting the most notorious response to the king's pawn opening, pawn to c5. It is important to mention that this line creates an asymmetrical position where many lines lead to sharp tactical games. Precise understanding of opening theory is key to success in these lines, while still offering systems against random pawn moves or moves that deviate wildly from the known opening theory. There are some caveats to these openings, which often create untraditional weaknesses that the player needs to be aware of to avoid unnecessary losses during the opening stage of the game. Let's begin by showcasing the most common continuation, which begins with the move 2 knight to f3. The most optimal continuation for black is to play the move 2 pawn to d6. And in this position, white can deviate in a couple of different ways. However, since the vast majority of chess players are rated below 1500 on chess.com, I will start with the most common continuation in that ELO range, which happens to be the move 3 bishop to c4. This happens to be a reflection of the recurring tendency to play the Italian game in e4, e5 lines, which is actually not the most optimal approach against c5. As one of the downsides to playing e5 on the first move is the fact that the pawn to e6 move becomes impossible, which would have otherwise nullified the effectiveness of the bishop on c4. In this line, the top engine move for black, according to high contempt mode Lc0, is the move 3 knight to f6. The reason why I'm running the engine on a high contempt setting is due to the fact that we are playing the Sicilian Defense to enable aggressive attacking styles, which maximize winning chances over draws, leading to more interesting games and less waste of time. In addition to this, engines under high contempt parameters tend to create complications in the position, which significantly increases the likelihood of low-rated opponents to blunder very early into the game and gain winning advantages right off of the opening. If white in this position decides to play the move pawn to e5, then black immediately starts equalizing after d takes on e5, knight takes on e5, and pawn to e6. And after something like short castle is played, you play the move bishop to d6, putting some pressure on this unprotected knight. If white in this position tries to continue holding on to this knight because it has a very nice outpost on e5 with something like, let's say, f4, because d4 will be met with c takes on d4, then in this position you just continue with short castles. And it's very easy for white to actually lose the game on the spot in this position. If he tries to further consolidate his knight on e5 by playing something like rook to e1, since as we said earlier, pawn to d4 is not possible due to c takes on d4, then you just continue with bishop takes on e5, and if pawn takes on e5 is played, you go for the move queen to d4 check. And in this position, there's only 3 legal moves: king to f1, king to h1, and rook to e3. So if, for example, white decides to continue with the move king to h1, then you do not capture this unprotected bishop on c4, and instead you continue with the absolutely diabolical knight to g4. The knight is protected by the queen, so queen takes is going to lead to losing the queen. And in this position, okay, well, the bishop is hanging, so your opponent might naively move this bishop back to e2, thinking that he's just saving his unprotected bishop and dislodging your knight. But knight to f2 check is actually a royal fork, winning the queen. And after king to g1, which is forced, knight takes queen on d1 is played with the discovered check. If the king goes to f1, then queen to f2 is just a checkmate. So the king has to go to h1, and then after knight to f2 check, king to g1 is forced, and then knight to h3 double check. If the king goes to f1, then queen to f2 is also a checkmate in this situation, so king to h1 is also forced. And in this position, I present to you the absolutely brilliant queen to g1 check. And in this position, the queen is protected by the knight on h3, so king takes is impossible. The white has to take with the rook takes g1, after which knight to f2 is a smothered checkmate. Earlier on I have stated in this position that pawn to d4 is not possible due to c takes on d4. However, some people might say, well, in that situation you can just play queen takes on d4 because of this bishop on d6 blocking the communication between the pawn and the queen. And you might think, okay, well, black in this situation is in a kind of a risky situation with all these pieces on his side of the board. So after something like queen to c7 is played, white might look in this position and think, okay, well, everything is defended. This knight is sufficiently defended. This bishop on c4 is defended. So he might not think much about this position, just continue with something like maybe rook to e1 or knight to c3. So for example, if he plays knight to c3, then in this situation, black is completely winning the game after the move bishop to f5, pinning the queen to the king. This bishop is protected, and whatever white does, black is just going to simply pick up this queen on the following turn, and he's going to be completely winning the game.